I forgot I owned this, but I figured I'd whip it out for a special occasion because when else can I wear this in life? And what is that special occasion? It's my top 10 movies of 2024, or at least the movies I liked. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Since we're talking about movies and I'm going to have to edit said video about movies, editing is the bane of my existence. I'm always looking for ways to improve my workflow and editing style. And with classes and learning paths on Skillshare, I like to think it's helped level up some of my editing skills, ever so slightly. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes, led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and more. There's a multitude of classes you can take on film, video production, or editing. One class I recently checked out was Advanced Video Editing with Adobe Premiere by Jordy Vandeput. Because I'm terrible when it comes to Adobe Premiere and I needed some help. The first 500 people who use my link in the description will receive a free 1-month trial of Skillshare. Get started today, the link is down below. Now let's talk about some movies. Strange Darling. I love the cat and mouse aspect of this film where a one-night stand spirals into a violent series of events. I quite enjoyed how violent this film gets at times, but it's so well paced. But the beauty of this film is it always keeps the tension alive and going. One other aspect I enjoyed about it was the innovative storytelling, and it also has a non-linear narrative, which is sort of reminiscent to Tarantino films, and I love that way of telling a story. It jumps all over the place, and you don't get the full picture until the end of the film, but along the way, every situation that these characters were in, I was on the edge of my seat. It's bloody, it's chaotic, the performances are great, so I had to put it on my top 10 of the year. Anora. This is a modern day twist on the Cinderella story. You have an exotic dancer who falls in love with a rich Russian kid who might be on the spectrum. After watching Anora, whatever awards Mikey Madison wins for Best Female Actress of the Year, she definitely deserves it, and I could stand by that. And as far as that modern day Cinderella story goes, when you step back and really think about this film, it's probably one of the most realistic tellings of that classic tale I've ever seen. And in real life, there's no such thing as a happy ending. Well, technically, at the end of this movie, there might be sort of a happy ending. I just thought about that. Heretic. This is a horror thriller that explores theological debates and the nature of good and evil. This is a movie where a very charismatic, creepy guy named Mr. Reed, played by Hugh Grant, traps two young girls in his basement. And for some odd reason, that plot just speaks to me. I love movies where a creepy dude traps people in his basement. Mister, let me out. I just want to see my mother again. Keep it down. I really enjoyed all three main performances throughout this movie. I thought Hugh Grant was just chewing up the scenery. And then you have the two main protagonists of the film who are Mormon missionaries, played by Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East. And I thought both of their performances added the perfect amount of levity while still testing the main antagonist of the film. And it was like a perfect blend of all three things culminating at once that ended up in a creepy basement. And the thing that this film tackles so well is the religious debate throughout this film. It's never sacrilegious, and I feel like it's fair to both sides, while utilizing board games as an analogy for religion, which I thought was brilliant and humorous at the same time. If you would have asked me a year ago if Wicked was going to make my top 10 list, I would have smacked you across the face and said, "What's wrong with you? I'm tough. I'm a man. One of my favorite movies is Terminator." But when it comes to this film, my wife has made me watch it 3 or 4 times. We saw it in theaters. We watched it on streaming. I have the 4K of it. And I like the movie. But after watching the movie, I want to defy gravity too. And I think it unlocked a hidden love for musicals I never knew I really had. Don't get me wrong, I've always enjoyed movies like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory or the original Wizard of Oz. I don't know, call me crazy, but I find this movie easy to watch. I enjoy the performances by Ariana Grande. I like that friendship dynamic that they have. I think the music's really well done. My only complaint are some of the visuals in the film. I just wish it had a little bit of contrast. and they could up the saturation like 3%. And as far as the themes go throughout this film, I don't think they're overbearing. I think it's very subtle, and they really do focus on the performances and the visuals at times, which I enjoy in a musical. Dune Part 2. This continues the epic saga, and Paul finally rides a giant sandworm. Oh yeah. Denis Villeneuve can do no wrong, and please, if I mispronounced his name, don't correct me. I've only been saying it wrong for the last 10 years, so leave me alone. But when it comes to this epic sci-fi film, this is what movies should be and should strive to be, because this thing looks beautiful up on the big screen. And I'll keep it real with you, I didn't necessarily love the first Dune film that came out a few years ago. I thought it was good, but after watching the sequel and going back and watching its predecessor, I actually enjoyed it more. I just didn't comprehend where the story was really going and the build-up. I just thought that first film was a little bit too slow for its own good, but I think the second film gets everything right that first film kind of missed out on as far as the pacing goes, the character moments, and getting to know these people and care about them on this journey. And plus, giant sandworms are pretty awesome to watch, and on a quick side note, I'm so mad I never got the Dune popcorn bucket. One of my favorite sequences in Dune Part 2 was the Black Sun scene. I love the visuals of that. I love the fight choreography and just how immersive it was. And the best way I can describe Dune Part 2 is it feels like a biblical sci-fi epic that you can just enjoy and immerse into as you eat some popcorn. And that's why I had to put it on my list. Challengers. It's a sports movie about a toxic love triangle. Is it just me, or does it feel like drama sports movies with compelling characters are very few and far between nowadays? Director Luca Guadagnino directs the shit out of this movie. It's so intense and thrilling and keeps you on the edge of your seat. For example, during the climax of this movie, there's a tennis match that goes down, and you get a POV shot from the tennis ball's point of view as you're going back and forth, smashing against each racket, and you get close-up slow-mo shots of the competitors just oozing and dripping sweat, and it's so intense, and I loved every second of it. And once again, at the core of this, it is a sports movie, but you really also focus on the drama in this love triangle, even though it's very toxic, because you have these two dudes who simp over Zendaya, but then again, it's Zendaya, so it's like I sort of get it. And the last thing I want to say about Challengers is the intensity from the directing style throughout this film. I thought it was done to perfection, and I can't wait to see the upcoming American Psycho remake from the same director. The only negative I might have is Austin Butler as Patrick Bateman. I just, maybe make him Paul Allen, but not Patrick Bateman. Furiosa is a prequel to Mad Max Fury Road. Leave the fuel and I will spare your lives. When it comes to the Mad Max franchise, it's one of my favorite action franchises of all time. And when it comes to Mad Max Fury Road, I think it's one of the best action films of the last 15 years. Now, when it comes to the prequel origin story of Furiosa, was that a story that I really felt needed to be explored? Not really, but I was just happy to go back to the post-apocalyptic wastelands and see some epic shit go down. When it comes to this new installment, it's once again directed by George Miller, who's directed every film in this franchise, and for a dude who's 70 plus years old, he still has this vitality of a 25-year-old director looking to prove himself in Hollywood. One aspect about this film I really enjoyed, and it might have taken 2 viewings to get there, was Chris Hemsworth's performance, where he's just hamming it up and chewing up the scenery, and he sort of has a big rubber nose on throughout the entire movie, but nevertheless, he feels like a live-action cartoon character at times, but if you just embrace it for what it is, it's a really phenomenal performance. But when it comes to the high-octane action throughout this film, I don't have many complaints, and I think that's what the movie does best. Well, I do have a few complaints, and here they go. I feel like, in comparison to its predecessor, this movie looks a bit more digital and green screened, and it doesn't look like they shot as much of it on location. And maybe we can blame that on production issues or budget or time constraints or what have you, but at the end of the day, I feel like this is a worthy installment into the Mad Max franchise, and it's a damn good movie to watch at home, especially if you want a quality action movie. The Wild Robot, an animated movie about a robot who finds the meaning of humanity and her purpose in life. Quick backstory, I saw this film at Fantastic Fest last October, and going into the screening of this movie, I knew nothing about it. And don't get me wrong, I love me some Pixar movies, I love classic DreamWorks animated movies, but this film was not on my radar whatsoever. And halfway through it, I could feel a tear trickling down my cheek into my popcorn bucket. And that's when I knew this movie was working. Now, going back to the plot of this movie, it encapsulates a lot of different elements I love to see up on the big screen. For example, there's a deserted island in the movie. I like that. There's also a robot learning what it means to be human and what humanity is all about. It reminds me of some of my favorite movies of all time, like this right here or this right here. And there's definitely a handful of very emotional moments throughout this movie that will give you the feels, and they're well earned. But one of the other great things about the movie is the morbid, dark humor throughout that talks about death and then makes fun of it. And I can appreciate things like that, especially in a family film that the main demographic is children. Maybe that's dark and morbid in itself, but I appreciate things like that. Deadpool and Wolverine, because this top 10 list needed a comic book movie. If I come with you, I'm coming for blood. And by the way, these aren't even butter knives like every YouTuber does when they're talking about Wolverine. These are actually little forks because all of my butter knives are actually in the dishwasher right now, and I had to make the video. This is a crossover movie that's been in the works since, I guess you could technically say, since Wolverine Origins. And I gotta say, after watching Deadpool and Wolverine team up on the big screen, I was satisfied with what I got. Because when it comes to action films or comic book action movies, I love when an odd couple team up to kick some ass and save the day. It's one of my favorite tropes with some classic action films like this right here or this right here. You have the humor and slapstick comedy style of Ryan Reynolds, but then you also have the dramatic line delivery that really elevate the film and ground it into something more than just some modern day forgettable comic book film, because Hugh Jackman's performance throughout this film is a true testament to what screen presence and charisma can really do for a character or a comic book film. It can just elevate it beyond what the pages of the script are saying and doing. And going back to the comic book genre of things, this is one of the more enjoyable comic book films I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years, and it's one movie that I would go back and revisit once a year on a rainy days I eat frozen pizza just to have a good time. That sequence where Hugh Jackman puts on the Wolverine cowl for the first time in cinematic history, it's a good thing I got an extra large popcorn bucket that day. I'm just gonna say it like that. Let's go to the next one. The Substance. It's one of the most batshit crazy body dysmorphia movies I've ever seen, and I can't stop thinking about it. Where do I even start with this movie to justify why it's number one on my list? Well, when I went to the theater to watch this initially, I didn't understand the gravity of what I was about to witness. And before watching the movie at the theater, I bought a hot dog. And by the way, on a quick side note, never buy meat products at a movie theater. And that's coming from a guy who used to work at the movie theater, but for some odd reason that day, I did so. And suffice it to say, after watching Dennis Quaid in the opening act of this film eat, I did not eat that hot dog. One thing I loved about this movie was the satirical critiques it had towards Hollywood's beauty standards, and I thought it was top notch. And by the end of the film, it does go off the rails, but it goes off the rails in the best way possible, and it almost, I would say, feels earned. I think earned is one way to say it. Yeah, it's completely grotesque, disgusting, and I loved every second of it. It has this very surreal visual style that keeps you immersed into the story. And Demi Moore, it's been a while since I've seen Demi Moore up on the big screen, and after watching this movie, I want to see more Demi Moore. I've been a fan ever since watching this movie over and over on cable as a stupid little kid at my grandparents' house, because they had every, cable channel and I could watch it at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's besides the point. But my favorite scene with Demi Moore is there's one sequence where she's getting done up to leave the house to go on a date, and she keeps coming back to the bathroom mirror because she's unsatisfied with the way she looks, and eventually she just loses her shit. And when it comes to the plot of the movie and the moral dilemma that you have to ask yourself after watching it, what would you do to keep your youth? And if it were up to me, yes, I would inject some random substance into my body and suck my younger self dry. That sounds weird, but I would do it. And before I wrap things up, the main reason I had to put The Substance at number one on my top 10 of the year is It's a film that I couldn't stop thinking about after I left the theater. And for me, that's a very rare phenomenon nowadays. As always, thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. That way I can see you next time.